Hello and welcome back to today's American Flyer Trains for the rebuild of the tender for 3/22/1947 New York Central Hudson 464 with smoke and tinder. You just saw in the previous video some before shots of what the unit looked like prior to being rebuilt, as it was disassembled, or what it looked like disassembled, its components, and then a little highlight of just two steps, really two major steps, in order to disassemble this unit. So I'm going to revisit that just a little bit and show you some of these components, and you just saw it in operation. Just some quick housekeeping. I assure you that I will not be skipping the promise to revisit process and techniques and best practices in the rebuild, diagnosis, and maintenance of these great American Flyer trains. There won't be any hype, won't be any trying to sell you anything, won't be any list of, hey, here's my favorite 6 things to do, or the worst the things that I hate most about these trains. Won't be any of that. I'm going to base this on my experience over almost 5 years of rebuilding these, and a learning process of what to really focus down on, in addition to the disassembly and cleaning and then reassembly and the soundness of mechanical and electrical components. The things that I have noticed that cause a lot of headaches with these trains, and then move on from there. It'll be by trial and error, it'll be by control group. Now, for example, I consider the tender a control group before it gets hooked to the locomotive. Process of elimination, bottom-up logic, things like that. But with that said, let's focus in now a little bit on this smoke and tinder unit. Its basic components: the car's chassis, the tender's chassis, and then the platform upon which the components sit. You may call it the motor mount, or the smoke and bellows and gear or motor assembly, whatever, but it sits on a platform above the tender base. Now, it's fairly easy to separate these two, and I'll show you in just a moment where it was separated and how it was done. Notice that these are the original bellows. This far exceeds my expectations as to what this thing would look like. It does have a little pinhole right there. It looks like that is probably along one of the creases. But I didn't think it was worth putting any kind of material on that, any kind of element that might patch it up. I know Mr. Barker does recommend some sort of liquid rubber. I'm not going to do that because I don't know exactly what its reaction would be. I cleaned it with cold or warm, lukewarm water and a Q-tip. Then I carefully gave it a coating of silicone using a Q-tip that was dipped in the silicone. It was already pliable and flexible and soft, and I think that may help it last a little while longer. Of course, you recognize this as the smoke unit, the smoke filler tube, and then the exit tube for the smoke. You saw plenty of that. I had to let some of it clear out of here before I could make the video. The bellows, the lever for the bellows, the gear, the worm gear, the on-off switch for the smoke and choo-choo, which is activated by that lever right there underneath the train, which means it's exposed. The motor bracket, the field, the brush bracket assembly, and the armature. It's basically the same type of motor that you'll find in the locomotives. It's just configured just a little bit differently, and it's actually fairly easy to work on. Now, I hand rotated the armature right here, just using my finger. I hand rotated the armature to collapse the bellows. And when you do, it exposes 2 screws that you can see are very nice and shiny right there, one across from the other, which are the only 2 screws which hold this platform onto the chassis. That's it. Once those 2 are disabled, you can then rotate this motor assembly off and lay it on its side. Now, you're left with 2 wire connections. One of the power cables travels to the back truck. You can see it right there. And then it has a feed that goes to the motor. On the front truck, at its pin location, is the other power cable for the locomotive, and then a power feed that goes up to the smoke unit and hits back to the remainder of the unit on here through this wire right here. That's it. I went ahead and disabled those two solder points because it was just too easy. There's two wires each. They're not my favorite thing to do to hook those up. You know sometimes how problematic they are, but I felt like it was in the best interest. Once I did that, the only thing I disassembled is on the back. I took out these two screws right here that hold the brush bracket assembly. Once those are disabled or removed, you can remove the brush bracket assembly, the field, and the armature and have great access to them. As a matter of fact, at that point, you can just slide the armature right out. And then you can prop the field and the brush bracket assembly up so that it's not putting too much stress on these little single wires right here, single threaded wires. Now, unlike some American Flyer motors, these springs are part that hold the brush down. These springs are part of the electrical circuit. They aren't always a part of the electrical circuit in other motors, but they are here. So it's worth your while to treat those gently and to clean them. Make sure the solder points are solid right up here, and then make sure that they're clean. Once those are kind of picked up with tweezers and set aside, the brushes will fall out. These are just tiny miniature slotted brushes. They were actually in fairly good condition considering the age and the non-maintenance that hasn't been performed on this unit. Pulled them out, cleaned them. They were soaked in oil, grease, and carbon dust. Not a recipe for good performance or performance at all. And of course, I'm going to give you some illumination on this, I hope. Oh, I can't. Right there you can see the commutator surface, the edge of it. I just cleaned it off like I do anything else on any locomotive. Same thing on the field. There was a good bit of rust on the interior of this motor, including, you can see some of the scars from the rust on the armature, on its plates. The field had, I would call it excessive rust, because I don't see that much of it on fields, but this little motor had plenty of it. Once those two screws were out, everything was free access. Now, I did not disassemble the bellows. I didn't see any reason to do that, nor the smoke unit, because I had confidence it was going to work to begin with.